Hello, today I'm joined by Jodi Dean. She's professor of science at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in New York State. Professor Dean is the author of 13 books, including The Communist Horizon. Professor Dean, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'll just begin by asking you the following question, Professor Dean. We are currently witnessing unprecedented public protests in many Western states against record-breaking levels of social inequality, economic poverty, and militarism of the United States-led NATO alliance. This week in France, for example, the largest mass protests are occurring since the historic upheavals of 1968. Something like 3 million workers across France are right now holding strikes to bring down the government. Do you think the international political conditions, particularly in Western countries, have reached a historic juncture where revolutionary change is ripe?
That's a strong question. I'll say I'm one of the worst predictors of anything ever. I didn't predict that Trump would have been elected, and so my predictions won't be worth very much. However, the fact that people are out in the streets, the fact that so many people are out in the streets, the fact that so many people are now fully aware of the extortionate, exploitative, oppressive conditions brought about by capitalism, imperialism, and US militarism is a sign of hope that people are not willing to take it anymore and are willing to come together and fight back. Now, whether or not that means that this mass energy can direct itself or be directed in the direction of emancipatory revolution is another question. So the kind of key issue is, are we, now I say we, meaning people on the left, people on the side of the working class, are we strong enough? Are we together enough to let this mass display of outrage become something more? I mean, the conditions can be ripe, the conditions can be there, but revolution remains a kind of potential. And then which direction that potential will go is another question. We saw that during a lot of the COVID uprisings, right? Many, like in a revolutionary time, all social forces are out there, be they reactionary forces or progressive forces, forces of workers, forces of thugs, forces of unionized, the working class across the board, or forces of people who have racist and anti-immigrant sentiments. So how this can go is a matter of the struggle.
Yeah. Well, would you say, Professor Dean, that, at least, sorry, I didn't mean to kind of place you in a position where you're making a very clairvoyant type prediction, but I just meant to inquire with you of the potential, the mood, the mass energy that you talk about. I mean, I think, would you agree that we're in a very historic situation of record levels of this kind of like upheaval and tension and mass energy and discontent, disillusionment? There's an historic situation at the present. Would you agree?
Oh, I absolutely fully agree. And it's been building for a few years. And right now, with the record-breaking numbers of people out in the streets, I mean, anything could happen. The potential is there. We are seeing a strong desire for significant change.
Yeah. Let me just move on.
And I should add, in the kind of change that our political systems are designed to prevent, right? We're seeing, this is why people have to go into the streets. They recognize that the political state structures that we have are actually barriers to people's being able to, secure their basic conditions of life, to meet their basic needs. Real barriers actually to addressing the most pressing issues of the day that also include climate change, NATO aggression, the sort of increased numbers, rapid amounts of unemployment and economic immiseration. So people see that the governments we have are barriers rather than vehicles.
I mean, it's immensely ironic and paradoxical that, 30 years ago, a short time ago, just 30 years ago, approximately, Western political leaders were declaring the triumph of capitalism and Western democracy. Socialism and communism were pronounced dead as political ideas. And Margaret Thatcher, the British former prime minister, famously declared, there is no alternative to Western capitalism. However, you would boldly argue that the time is actually ripe for communism, socialism. Can you explain why you think that is the case, why it is ripe now to make a case for communism, socialism?
So we've talked about the degree of mass rejection of the current order that we see manifest in the protests that are going on really strongly across Europe right now. So that's one indication. I think we can see some other indications, and I'll just mention two. The bailouts in 2008 meant that the state, I'll use the US example, the state had to come in to save capitalism by throwing billions of dollars at the big banks, right? By saving Wall Street, not Main Street. This was proof that the state recognizes itself as having to control the economy. Now, that's a classic understanding of what a socialist government does. But what we saw was the state controlling the economy for the benefit of the banks, the capitalists, the landlords, the financiers, in classical terms, the bourgeoisie. So the state came in to organize, control, bail out the economy for the sake of capital, but not for the sake of the vast majority of people, namely the class of workers, the class of producers. And people know this, right? People have seen the state come in to secure the economy, but in a bad direction. So that is a sign that, go ahead.
Sorry, you're saying it's quite feasible. It's not a utopian, impossible program to have a socialist society, socialist economy, because what you've said there is that it's already been almost implemented or demonstrated, except that it's to benefit the capitalist class and the private owners and the investors, as opposed to the mass of society.
Absolutely, right? That's the thing that's completely wild, is we have like a perverse, bad form of socialism, that's socialism only for the rich, right? Use the state to distribute money and privilege and opportunity only to the very wealthy, and take from the many. So I think, and that's clear to everyone, right? That this is what's happening. What we and now people are in the streets, like, trying to fight back. So the question is, how can we change it? And of course, the only way really is mass struggle. So this is one big indication. The state is already doing that economic work that we associate with socialism. It's not just plausible, like you're saying, it's not just possible. It's already happening, but it's happening in the wrong direction. Additionally, we saw during the COVID crisis the use of states to try to guarantee public health. Now, there's lots of debates. Did they fail to do this? Did they do this successfully? Did they use too much force? Whatever. But the larger point that the state was necessary to act for public and common benefit was made manifest to everyone. Right? That was clear. It was not going to be a decision of markets, right? Particularly in the first 4 or 5 months, about whether or not, what was going to happen. It wasn't going to be just up to private individuals. It was a state policy, right, across all over the world, which was again like, oh, okay, if the state can step in to do things for the public and common benefit, it should do that all the time, not just under these exceptional exceptional reasons. And of course, the only way to make that happen is when the workers, the working class, the producers control the state. Right? That can't happen if it's only, small groups of capitalists who are the ones whose interests are reflected in the state. It will only be under these exceptional times when they have really no choice but to step in, for public health reasons. So I think we see already the state acting is in the form that socialist states are supposed to act, but it's doing that for the benefit of the capitalist class, the benefit of the wealthy, not the benefit of the majority.
Right. In the United States, where you are, you have observed that the political establishment of the two main parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, the political establishment is deeply fearful of communist movements, socialist politics, despite declaring the supposed victory or triumph of capitalism 30 years ago. And so what is this fear? Is this fear, in a way, an indirect proof that it's a very viable political movement if they're so fearful of it?
Yes, 100%. I mean, it's really strange that mainstream politicians, just like in the U.S., include like from Obama to Trump, all say, oh no, we're against terrorism, we're against terrorism, fascism, communism, right? Obama too listed communism as one of the great threats, and Trump just recently gave a speech at this conservative meeting called CPAC, where he rants on and on about the threat of communists. Well, okay, great. If a specter is haunting the American political establishment, that's great. That means that communists are super powerful. That means that we actually have to just claim that name or make sure that we are organize ourselves with communism as the horizon, right? A horizon that says that workers need to be in control of production, that workers need to be in control of our political arrangements and government, that we do this collectively, that we make decisions around production for the sake of the common benefit and for the sake of people and the planet. They're terrified of this, right? They're terrified that people will recognize, oh, actually, we can do it. And they're terrified of anything that starts to go into like any kind of threat to the system that is making them money and keeping them in power. So they have to say this over and over to try to prevent people from even thinking in this direction. But as we see it, as you started the conversation, people all over are in the streets demanding change, demanding better wages, demanding basically an end to this economy that's utterly crushing us.
And you've said, and it's a very important point, that it's vital that people recognize that they won't find any solution or, amelioration in their situation by appealing to the Democrat Party. In other words, the Democrat Party are part of the problem. They're part of that political establishment, that political enemy, that status quo, which is oppressive and needs to be got rid of. It's an illusion or a delusion to have any sort of faith in the Democrat Party, even though Trump and his people refer to the Democrats as the radical left and the mad Marxists, which is, to me, and a lot of people around the world, is just complete fallacy, to accuse the Democrats of being radical left. I mean, that's just...
It's bonkers. It's just bonkers. And it's the kind of thing, it's like, we think like communism is the real threat. And so we're going to stain our enemies with this name because, I mean, how else would the Republicans be able to distinguish themselves from Democrats? I mean, the ruling class parties are basically agree on 90% of the same stuff. Right. They let me use an example. There was about to be a railway strike in the U.S. 2 months ago, and the Biden, who claims himself the most pro-worker president we've had and in half a century, puts his foot down and coordinates to prevent the workers from striking. In Canada, they fought back and fought. I mean, they didn't get to strike, but they fought back against the law that wasn't being passed to prevent them from striking. But in the U.S., this pro-worker president prevented the workers from striking. And then what happens just a few weeks later, we get this terrible environmental catastrophe with the rails crash in East Palestine, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And so this is the same party refused to try to get a real national health care program. This same party refused to enact legislation that would guarantee women a right to abortion on a national level. I mean, the Democrats are part of the problem. They're in no way going to be a force for the kind of change that's necessary given the given the economic and climate crisis that we're in.
Mm. Finally, Professor Dean, you advocate for a clear, confident, and explicit demand by workers for communism or socialism. Call out. That's what we're aiming for. That's what workers should aim for in your advice. And you would advise not for them to simply demand for more democracy. This gets back to your concept of the communist horizon, that there must be a clear political definition of what workers especially want or need, and for them not to frame their demands in more democracy, for more democracy, but actually to specify that they want a socialist endpoint, a socialist objective. Why do you say that's an important distinction? Why should people be very explicit and specific about demanding a socialist objective as opposed to more democracy? What's the importance of that distinction?
I'm going to say with a small example and then branch out. So the small example would be if we think about what happens in the euphemistically called workplace restructuring. What happens is the bosses and their management consultants might involve workers in discussing the changes that have to be made. So you might call this a kind of participatory process in which workers are actually being made to be part of the conditions that will screw them, will eliminate their jobs, eliminate their benefits, force them to take cuts, force them to work more, force them into different kinds of job arrangements that are going to benefit who? The company, the factory, the owners, not the workers. And so having a democratic horizon for those demands is only like, oh, please, let me come and help build the guillotine that's going to kill me. So in that small level, we can see how it is that democracy as the goal can actually be, let's talk about how we can, how I can be part of making my life worse for me and my friends and comrades. It's the same thing on the political level. If we're only talking about democracy, we're not talking about the fundamental conditions of ownership. We're not talking about who owns the means of production, who for whose benefit are we producing? How are we determining that? So I think when democracy remains the horizon, we stay within the system we are, and we say, oh, the only thing that's wrong with the system is it's not been democratic enough, not that it's structured economically for the benefit of the few and the exploitation of the many. As long as we play the game that it's just about democracy, we don't address this fundamental core of who owns the means of production, for whose benefit is production carried out.
You would I think you would say that democracy is used as a kind of a camouflage of the capitalist condition. So we kind of equate democracy with acceptance of capitalist exploitation, capitalist destruction, capitalist war, and we assume that this is democracy. This is as good as it gets. If we
I love that.
Argue for or limit ourselves to this democracy horizon, then we're really accepting things as they are in their worst state of capitalism.
Absolutely, and the one of the important parts that you mentioned in there when you say we're accepting capitalism, and we're also accepting a national framing of our political issues that can continue to lead to, particularly from the standpoint of the U.S., aggressive militarism, war, and imperialism. When we're framing it in terms of democracy, it seems like that our socialism or our fight for better conditions for all working people is within just one country, rather than part of an international struggle for the rights of all working people, for an end to economic exploitation for all working people around the world. It can't be the case that it's just like, oh, our workers are okay, while these workers are forced to be under horrible conditions, right? Conditions that globalization has really exacerbated. So part of the disguise or the illusion of this democratic frame is one that blocks from view the international conditions of the working class.
Mm. And you made a great observation, I thought, when you said that the Western democracy, the illusion of it, in reality, it's a dictatorship of billionaires.
Yeah, totally. It's utterly a dictatorship of billionaires. I mean, we see this in I don't know, small, big. We see them in ways like, a couple of companies can control who says what and who sees what. For example, I'm thinking of Facebook and Twitter. Right? They can choose if someone's going to be blocked from their space or not from their place, because these are companies, and they own these media platforms. So what bourgeois liberalism tells us, oh, there's free speech and all this. It's like, well, actually, it's not. There's a couple of billionaires who are going to determine, who's allowed to speak on their platforms and what you will see on their platforms. Right? They will generate algorithms that will determine what will be possible for you to see. That doesn't even sound like bourgeois free speech, right? This sounds like a kind of dictatorship of billionaires. Additionally, these billionaires can make countries essentially, and particularly smaller countries, but in the U.S., different states and cities, bend to their will by saying, "Oh, we'll come and build our factory here, or we'll locate our corporate headquarters here if you don't charge us any taxes." We'll do and they hold peoples hostage this way.
Right, Professor Dean, I was going to say that was my final question, but I'd like to ask you another question if you don't mind. If we can
sure.
Continue for a few more minutes. So you're saying that people, workers in particular, the working class, should articulate a demand for socialism, communism, put that demand out. How do you get that kind of how do you get that into the public discourse? That kind of that kind of demand, that title of that political program. How do you get that going in the public discourse? How do we start to begin reviving or rejuvenating this kind of language about we want socialism, we want communism, we want to abolish capitalism? How do we make that conversation more prevalent in the public space?
Well, in some ways, you and I are doing that right now, right? And you do it through your work. I do it through mine. We're trying to do that. I think there are revolutionary parties that also do this. But since we're talking on International Women's Day, I want to use that as an example. In 1917, it was the struggle and big march of the women textile workers in Petrograd that actually kicked off the February Revolution. And Trotsky himself said, nobody expected this International Women's Day to lead to the revolution, but there it happened. So yeah. I think kind of being open to the way that our demonstrations, our movements can, quickly become revolutionary opportunities is great. And the march in 1917 from the women textile workers in Petrograd, they had as one of the slogans, bread and peace. And it was only going to be possible, bread and peace would only be possible with the overthrow of the czar. And so when we articulate our demands, we may not say the demand in this march is jobs and communism, but we can articulate demands that are only realizable once that workers have control of the state, once we're within a socialist formation, once we've overturned, this horrifying, exploitative, oppressive set of capitalist governments that we're in.
Yeah. By the way, happy Women's Day, International Women's Day. I should have said that at the beginning, but it just shows you, it just reminds how much achievement has been bequeathed by socialism, and we take it for granted, or it's obscured. I mean, things like International Women's Day and public holidays and 8-hour working days and entitlements at work. Socialism has really been such a huge contributor to advancement and progress, and yet it's so denigrated by the powers that be, and the status quo has given very little, if anything, of benefit to workers. Yet it's quite amazing how we're always fighting an uphill battle to try and prove the case, the validity and the merits of socialism, and yet it should be quite obvious given things like the International Women's Day. Professor Dean, this really will be my final question. Do you see hope in the mass protest, industrial action that we've seen across the United States and is occurring in Europe? Do you see that workers are still very much receptive to or advocating socialism? I mean, do you see the workers in the United States?
It's a hard battle. This is a hard battle, right? We've, the United States has been a rabidly anti-socialist and anti-communist country for over a century. And they repeat, the capitalist class and their political functionaries repeat this language all the time. And so building a socialist consciousness is itself a task, right? Helping people understand and analyze their situation from a socialist perspective isn't necessarily automatic. But the more workers realize through struggle that they depend on each other, the more they realize that, and they know this, right? All workers, particularly all unionized workers, know this. They know that the bosses are going to try to, screw them over as best they can. And the more people march together, feel the strength that comes to collectivity, the more they realize that, actually, socialism is what we want. Communism is our horizon, but it's not necessarily automatic. Struggle together helps bring people together and helps them feel their power, right? The power that only comes about through collectivity. But it's, I don't want to kind of sugarcoat this. I mean, the kind of media world that we're in that separates people, where everybody has their own personal media all the time, that's negative. That's something we have to fight against. But coming out together in the streets, fighting together, actually strengthens people's inside sense that socialism is possible and necessary.
Well, as you pointed out earlier on, a very good point too, that the 2008 massive bailout of Wall Street instead of Main Street kind of demonstrated the feasibility of socialist control, state control of the economy. Professor Dean, thanks very much. Thank you indeed for your great insights and passionate knowledge sharing. And again, happy International Women's Day to you.
It was very nice talking to you. I enjoyed it. Take good care.
Thank you very much. We'll be in touch, hopefully.